We have been going through the fruits of the Spirit, and this all summer, and this is finally our last one, and it's the one everybody's been dreading. I mean, I've had a lot of people be like, "Do we really have to talk about self-control?" When we talked about gentleness, the last message on gentleness, someone actually came up to me and was like, "Hey, it's been a great series, thanks." And I was like, "Oh, I can take the hint here." We kind of groan when we start talking about self-control. Please no, please don't make us do this one. It's one we struggle with. It's really difficult. Remember on the all church retreat, we kind of we drank the juice of whatever we need the most of. I'm pretty sure, again, it wasn't super scientific. Self-control was the one we took and drank more than any other. Meaning self-control, we kind of said as individuals in the congregation, this is the one we need the most of. This is the one we struggle with the most. And it's something that probably isn't unique to Westgate. And like I've mentioned, some of these overlap, right? Some of the fruits of the Spirit overlap. Gentleness is kind of self-control with anger. I want to be angry, but I'm going to be gentle instead. Patience is self-control as you wait. So remember, they all kind of overlap, but self-control is a tough one. And it kind of feels awkward for me to come up here and be like, do a sermon where it's like, here's how to be self-controlled, because I'm no expert. Really, the only thing worse than having to sit here and listen to a self-control sermon is to have to deliver one. So sorry, I'm not an expert, and I want to tell you guys that now. But I hope that this morning we can give you some encouragement and maybe give you some tools that can help move you in the right direction. Whenever I mention self-control, and some of you who groaned at that whole idea, I want you to think about, where'd your mind go to? When you think of self-control, what comes up? I think maybe there's a lot of different things, right? Maybe you kind of default to the whole diet and exercise thing, right? Oh, it's really hard to be disciplined in what I eat and exercise. Maybe it is maybe you do think of a sin that you just can't kick. Maybe it's something associated with lust or with some kind of overindulgence that you just can't handle. Maybe it really is a substance, right? So some of us have a hard time, and that can be food. It can be alcohol, prescription meds, and nicotine. Even in a church like this, we have people who struggle with this stuff. We have people that are on different levels of recovery with some of these things. So you're not alone with that. Someone sent me a stat the other day that middle-aged adults are binge drinking at record levels right now. Middle-aged adults are binge drinking at record levels. In 2022, 30% of middle-aged adults aged 35 to 50 reported binge drinking, which is up from 20% just a few years ago. So 30% in 2022 of middle-aged adults, 35 to 50 reported binge drinking. Some of you are more upset about the second stat, where you're like, oh, I'm middle-aged, 35 and up, oh no. The other parts what I want you to hear is people are drinking more right now than really any time we can think of. Maybe there's an anger issue. That's a self-control issue as well. Maybe it's technology, right? Sometimes it feels like we're a slave to our technology, to our phones. So there's a lot of different things in our life that require self-control, and it kind of feels like maybe we don't have it. And so I want you to know, if you're struggling with any of these things or something I haven't listed, you're not alone. We all struggle with self-control in some ways. And again, I hope this morning we can encourage you and maybe give you a few tools. The text this morning has a lot about self-discipline and self-sacrifice in it. And so I think Paul has some good wisdom for us. And really in the broader context of the text, he's writing to the church in Corinth. And they're a bunch of individualists. They're a bunch of people who insist on having it their way, their preferences, and they want their rights. And they're basically like, I have a right to do anything, so I'm going to do it. And part of what Paul is doing here and what he's saying is really brilliant, because he's saying the first part of the text, saying I have a right to take pay. He's a traveling evangelist. He's educated. It costs money to do these things. It costs money to do what he's doing. And other churches that he's traveled to, they pay him. He gets paid everywhere he goes. And even in Corinth, they agree. You should probably get paid. And people in Corinth want to pay him. But he says, basically, he's saying, I'm not going to take pay here. I'm not going to do that. And we really, if we had to guess why, it'd be pretty easy to guess why. There's a bunch of factions there. Remember, I follow Paul, I follow Peter, I follow Apollos. He doesn't want to play their games. He doesn't want to get into their little individualistic competition. He doesn't want someone to say, well, I paid Paul. And hey, Paul, I paid you. And because I paid you, here's what you need to say. He didn't want to be in anybody's pocket. And so he's saying, I have a right to get paid. But if I get paid, now I'm kind of getting into some game that I don't want to play. And so here, I'm not going to take pay from you guys. I have a right, but I'm not doing it because I don't want it to hinder the kingdom. And so I think that's, and he's using that as an example of a lot of different ways. They're kind of insisting on their rights, and yeah, you have a right to do this, but think about how it is hurting others. And so really what he's getting at is just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And a lot of Americans need to hear that, right? We are so worried about protecting and exercising our rights. You know, you can't tell me. You can't tell me what to do. I'm free. You know, we're almost to the point where if someone tells us not to do something, even if it's something we weren't going to do, well, we're going to do it now because you told me not to. Like, I want to fight against this. So we're kind of a rebellious people in a sense in our individualism. And it's all good to have rights, and it's good to kind of emphasize those. I know there's some thinking behind that, but as Christians, we are bound to Christ, and we are bound to each other. And if exercising my right, and I don't just mean political rights, if exercising my right misleads you, if exercising my right sends the wrong message, if it negatively impacts you in some way, I shouldn't do it. So I am bound to my Christian family. So one way that Christians are self-controlled is when necessary, they will give up their rights. They will give them up. If that's going to hurt someone else, if it's going to mislead them in any way. And that can also be my right to treat you poorly. Like, you're kind of dumb and I should treat you like you're dumb, but I'm not going to do that. So there's a lot of different ways we do this. I was talking with some friends about addiction the other day. And one thing that we identified as, and nobody ever wants to say they're an addict. No one ever wants to say I have an addiction problem. And so we don't have to use that word. But kind of thinking about, all right, do I really have a problem here? And one thing that you might be doing where it might be like, well, maybe I have a problem, is when you have the opportunity to do it, whatever this thing is, you have to do it. The opportunity has presented itself, and I have to take advantage of it now. So like, you know, it could be like, I'm at a buffet. You know, I'm at a buffet. I've already got my plate, my second plate, and it was good, but it's Golden Corral. I got to eat more. I got to stuff my face. I got to indulge. They have a chocolate fountain. You have to, right? And so the opportunity to indulge and stuff your face is there, and some people, if you kind of feel like you have to do that, maybe you have a problem. Similarly, you know, with alcohol, if it's like, hey, I'm out with my friends, and you know, so-and-so's not here to babysit me, and I have a designated driver, I have to binge drink. Maybe people, if you feel that way, you probably have a problem. Or everybody in my house is out of town. They're gone. I can watch whatever I want. Maybe you have a problem if you think, oh, when the opportunity's there, I have to take it. And you need to realize, if that is your mindset, when the opportunity is there, I have to take it, that opportunity is going to keep presenting itself. You have a problem if you have to do it when you have the opportunity. Second, you need to realize that, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. One obvious solution here is avoid the situations where you're tempted, right? Avoid situations where you're going to be tempted to do whatever this thing is. You know, if you're going to overindulge, avoid that situation. One thing that really helps with that, though, and with self-control in general, is to keep a calendar. And like some of you are really good about that. Some of us, myself included, are not. If you keep a calendar, you know when these tempting situations are going to arise, you're going to be ready for it, and you can plan for it. And I know some people, like if they're on a diet and they're keeping a calendar, it's kind of hard, right? Because then you're thinking about food all the time, and you're planning it out. So on that calendar, plan out everything. Not just food, not just when you're going to exercise, but when you're going to, when you got a kids event, when you're going to go out and have a social event, when you're going out of town, plan all of these things. And that will help you feel like you have just a little bit more control. And just that feeling just a little bit more control is going to help you in other areas of your life. And again, it'll help you plan and be ready for, okay, now there's going to be this work thing, and I know people are going to be drinking at this work thing, and I really don't want to drink. Then you can bring your own drinks that night, so you're well prepared in advance to not be tempted in that way. So keeping a calendar really helps. Next in our text, Paul speaks about his adaptability. He says, look, I'll become a slave to all. To the Jews, I can hang out with the Jewish crowd. I know their lingo. I know how they think. I can get in with them, and I can be cool with them, and I can connect with them, and, I can skip the bacon with them or whatever. But then I'll also adapt for Gentiles. Paul can go hang out with Gentiles, and he's not going to be like, is that pork chops in there? I'm not coming in there. Get rid of the pork chops, and then I'll come in. No, he doesn't do that. He's willing to hang out with them. He's willing to adapt. And I think that's something we don't acknowledge what a big deal it is for a good Jew and he kind of says, hey, I was a good Jew. I studied under Gamaliel. He's a Jew's Jew is what he'll tell you. But to be willing to give up his traditions and his preferences and his sense of self-identity and go hang out with Gentiles, we don't acknowledge what a self-sacrifice that is in and of itself. I hate that this analogy probably speaks to this pretty well, but it's almost like a Republican being able to go and hang out with Democrats and be cool with them and not argue with them and be respectful of them, and vice versa. It's almost like a Democrat being able to go hang out with Republicans and be like, and hear him talk nice about Trump and just sit there and be like, yeah, okay, I can see what you're saying there. People would have a hard time with this. We've drawn such hard lines. But Paul, he's willing to do something, but that's probably even a bigger step than that. That's how much he's willing to give up of his self-identity in order to win as many as possible, is what he's getting at here. So we need to be adaptable. We need to have that kind of adaptability. But sometimes the reason that we aren't self-controlled and the reason we can't beat an addiction or the reason we can't start up a new habit is because we have a lack of proper motivation. We're just not motivated like we should. We have unclear goals or they're too general. So if your motivation is I want to get hot, I want to be attractive, that's going to be a hard one to stick to. And so maybe a better way of thinking of it is hey, in May, I'm going to go to the beach for our anniversary, and I'd like to feel healthy, and I'd like to be able to fit into this swimsuit by then. So a more specific goal with specific deadlines and proper motivation. There's proper motivation and something measurable to work towards, you're more likely to follow through. You're more likely to put in the sacrifice that it entails. And so that's really what Paul's saying here. Paul's motivation is, I want these people to be saved. I want these people to go to heaven. I want the kingdom to grow. And so because of that, I'll be adaptable. I'll hear their ways of thinking that I don't really like, and I can adapt with that, and I can hang out with that, and I can eat shrimp or do whatever the other practices are that I swore I would never do. I can do all those things if that's going to bring these people to Christ. So he's adaptable, but he has proper motivation. In other cases, with trying to beat an addiction or start a new habit, maybe the motivation is I've hit rock bottom, and I don't want to be here anymore. Or maybe it's knowing if I do this, if I change this thing, it's really going to bless my marriage. It's really going to help my marriage. My marriage is going to be in a better place if I do this, or it's going to be better for my friendships. I can see how what I'm doing is impacting my friendships, and I want better friendships, and so that's going to motivate me to change this. And so you may need to explore why you want self-control, what these areas of your life that you feel like you can't get under control, and think about why you want it, and then maybe kind of figure out some measurable goals with the right motivation. And again, I think a calendar is really helpful here. And so another thing, when I was talking to some friends about addiction, here's another thing. Again, you don't have to label yourself an addict, but you might have a problem if you do this thing where you say, next week I'm going to start and I'm going to get serious about this. And so if you're starting next week, you indulge. I'm going to start the diet next week. So, here I come, China Star. I'm going to indulge. I'm going to take care of it. But then what happens, maybe next week you don't actually start. Then you did it all for nothing. And you've actually done more than you would have normally done. Same thing can be said. I've seen people do it with alcohol. I'm going to quit next week. So then I'm going to binge drink now, and then they don't start, and then they binge drink again. So you got to set these, you really have to be serious about a calendar and deadlines and like, I'm really going to do this. Otherwise, you might actually create more of a problem than what you started with. And another thing that I should mention here is that Paul's self-control is not for himself or about himself, it's for others. And yes, it's for God. Yes, it's out of obedience to God, but it's really out of love for people. It's really that he wants to bless these people. And so I think a lot of times maybe we focus on like, well, I just want to do this thing and I want to change this thing for God. And I think that is good. But it's sometimes easier and more measurable to say, hey, you know what? I want to work on this for my parents, for my siblings, for my friends, because it's going to help those relationships. And so if thinking about, if a good motivator is your friendships and relationships, that's okay. And I still think that's about God, because in blessing those relationships, you are also blessing God. So really, Paul, what he's saying in this last paragraph here is that he's not just doing stuff to do stuff. He isn't just shadow boxing. He isn't running without a goal in mind. He's intentional. He's motivated. He's got somewhere he wants to go. He has a purpose, and that drives him and it motivates him, and it reminds him that whatever loss or pain he's experiencing as he's wrestling with self-control, as he's wrestling with self-discipline, there's a good payout that's going to make it worth it. And when it comes to the disciplined Christian life, the payout is being with God, a non-perishable payout. And maybe in Paul's case, taking people with us when we go and see God. He wants to bring as many as possible. He wants to win as many as possible. And it's interesting, he uses this analogy of an athlete. In Corinth, they hosted the Isthmian Games, which is kind of like second to the Olympics. It's a big deal. And so this community of people in Corinth, they knew athletes and their training well. So the whole I beat my body thing like an athlete, they got that. They know athletes, they get up early, they watch what they eat, they're always exercising, they're watching what they consume. They know what real hardcore discipline looks like. But I also think it's interesting because studies show that self-control is like a muscle. It's something that if you don't have it, you can actually work it out and get better at it. So if you kind of feel like, I'm just not good at self-control, it's not my spiritual gift, it's something you can work on. It's something that you can start small with, and once you get that in control and you get better and you've learned to discipline yourself, you can get it in other areas of your life. And so it is like a muscle. And some people, sometimes I've read, how do you become more self-controlled? And some people are like, well, exercising more helps. And usually that's why people want self-control in the first place, is to exercise. But it's a good point, is if you get that one area under control, it spills over into different areas of your life. And so maybe that's helpful with the calendar. Maybe start small. If you really feel like you struggle with self-control, start small and you can build up that muscle. As we think about self-control, I want to leave you with this verse. It's 2 Timothy 1:7. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. And I know maybe some of you in here do have it. I need to acknowledge that some people do seem to have it pretty well, and some of us look at you and are like, you make me mad. But some of you do have it well, but we all struggle with it. And so some of you may be hearing this and thinking, this verse isn't talking about me. But I believe that God has built us in such a way that this is something that we can claim. We have the Spirit within us that can help us be self-disciplined and self-controlled, especially in the things that really matter. And I really want to emphasize that on the things that matter, because I definitely don't want people to walk away from the sermon this morning and be like, yeah, Brady motivated me to get hot. I'm gonna exercise and work out, and I'm gonna look great. That's not the point here. That's not what I'm trying to get at. I believe God wants to empower you with self-discipline on the things that really deeply matter. And health does matter. Health does matter. I know I've heard grandparents say, I want to get healthy because I want to watch my grandkids walk the stage. I want to get healthy because I want to be at my grandkids' wedding. That's great. That's a great motivator, right? And so there's nothing wrong with wanting to get healthy. That's a great reason to want to do that. But I believe God wants to empower you with self-discipline, that God can help you break whatever addiction you're struggling with. And if you don't want to call it an addiction yet, he can help you break whatever this thing in your life is that might be a problem. I believe you can become more disciplined in your prayer life and in your spiritual life with God's help. I believe you can be more controlled in the way you treat others, in the way you speak to others. I think you can get your anger and your resentment towards people under control. I think that you can be able to feel your emotions. You don't have to block them all out. You can feel the fullness of your emotions, but not let them totally control you. But not let your emotions totally. I believe that you can do that. You can control your body and your urges better than you think. I really believe that's what God's communicating to us here. You can do this. It is a muscle. It is something you can exercise with God's help. You can get self-controlled and motivated with the things that really do matter. So if you are here this morning and you're ready to turn over an addiction to God or a problem to God, your congregation's here and we want to pray with you and we want to lift you up and we want to encourage you with that. If you are ready to seek help, to seek accountability, we're here for that. Or if it's got nothing to do with the message today and you just want prayers from the congregation or you want to give your life to Christ, if you have any need, we want to invite you to come now as together we stand and sing.